Good evening, and welcome back to another edition of What's So Funny, the show that probes the minds, the brains, the psyches, and the brains of the people who bring you the funny this week. Legendary Canadian comic Kenny Robinson. We chatted a few weeks ago in his hotel room when he was performing at Yuck Yuck's Comedy Cabaret on Burrard. Spoke for the whole hour. It's the coughingest interview you'll hear, but a good one, I think you'll find. And we are sitting in Kenny Robinson's hotel room. Nothing untoward has happened yet.
Not just a hotel room, and they informed me it was a suite when I checked in.
This is a not so sweet suite.
It's a semi-suite, I guess it would be.
Yes, exactly.
It's a sweet and low. It's a high and low sweetener suite.
Kenny, the legend Robinson, legend in Canadian comedy. Blackie Gleason.
Yeah, that was fun doing that sketch. Years ago, David Hall was a manager that handled both Jim Carrey and Howie Mandel. He's seen me years ago and said if I changed my act into more of a Jackie Gleason type act, he'd be interested in handling me. And I thought about it for about 2 days, and I went, well, I can't make the rest of my career trying to be Gleason. So, needless to say, I never signed with that guy.
The rest of your act, like your stand-up act, Gleason never did stand-up, though.
Apparently he did.
Did he?
But, yeah, well, back then, stand-up was all different. It wasn't as we know it. But, I mean, when they did the vaudeville shows and the what have you, so there'd be some stand-up and some sketch as well. But, no, he was not really known as a stand-up comic. But just, I mean, back then, in those days, I mean, they sang. I mean, if you look now, if you go into record stores, how old am I? If you go into where they do sell records, like Jackie Gleason always had a series of albums, Jackie Gleason Music for Lovers. And so he would conduct and he would apparently write songs. And, back in those days, guys sang, they tap danced, they did everything back then in order to be an entertainer. So it seems like the bar has been much lowered since those days.
Well, on your show, After Hours, you had the, what was it, the Fat Ass
The Fat Ass Dancers, yeah. I wanted a throwback to the old days when the Jackie Gleason show from Miami Beach had the dancing girls and what have you. And also, Spike Lee did a movie called School Days. I remember seeing it in Chicago, and there's a big dance scene. Like Spike Lee always likes to have a big dance scene in most of his bigger movies. And there were a couple of large-sized girls that were dancing, and the audience was rip roaring it, and you're hearing people in the audience yell, "Look at that big girl move!" And I always remembered that the effect it had on the audience. I think it's impossible not to see a large-sized woman shaking that ass, and not smile. I think it's impossible. It's like sunshine. It's like hot chocolate on a cold day. It's like a kitten for a little girl. It's impossible to see a big ass girl shake it and not feel good inside.
Or a big ass guy too.
I guess so.
Rerun.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I guess people just
Cedric the Entertainer.
Yeah, Cedric. I guess we could, a couple of times when I've been caught dancing, it's been good for a couple of giggles. But yeah, something about a larger person. Well, that's Jackie Gleason again. He always did that little thing. They always say he's light on his feet. For a big man, he moves well.
And we're sitting here, and good thing this isn't on TV because you're dressed down for this radio interview. I'm used to seeing you in like a $1 million suit here.
I can go put on a sport coat if you like,
and a fedora or something.
Something I can. Well, it is a linen shirt. I could put on a tie or something just to make it a little bit more formal. I almost went on stage last night with jeans and a hoodie.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just because sometimes I find the audience may be intimidated by the suit and tie, so I went down the elevator and I stood outside the door and I went inside, looked around, didn't really. It wasn't sizing the crowd, but just like there was something in my body rejecting the whole idea of going on stage, not in a performance uniform.
How long have you been wearing the suit on stage?
At least 10 years now. At least 10, 12 years. I mean, all the time before. Excuse me for a second. I mean, there's been, there's a period of time when I went through, leather outfits and what have you. I mean, they were custom made because I was a big guy. Can't buy a lot of that stuff off the rack. But early 80s, I had this camouflage army fatigue thing for a while. So it was different periods of time. But for the most part, when I first got into comedy, I had a showcase at the Playboy Club in Chicago, and my mother said, well, if you're going to do the Playboy Club, you're going to need a new suit. So, and then before I even did stand-up, I read Dick Gregory's book, Nigger, and he said that an entertainer always owes it to his audience to be as well-dressed as possible, because they may only go out once a week or once a month, and you may be the closest thing to a star or a celebrity that they may get to see or may get to say they know, so you kind of owe it to them. And I remember when I first started out as a comic, I always thought there'd be like women with backless dresses in the audience, and I guess I might have had some, Bob Fosse, Lenny Bruce, jerk-off nightclub fantasy in my head what it was going to be like. So the whole idea of being dressed to the nines, plus my father was an entertainer, and he was always dressed to the nines, so I think that was also part of it. But, being a performer, I guess the audience, give the folks something to see, give them something to let them know that they're seeing a show.
Well, we're about the same age, and I agree with you. I think there's a subtle psychological difference in seeing someone on stage in something that you wouldn't see them walking down the street.
Yeah. I mean, the perfect example, when I was living in Winnipeg, I was maybe about 17, 18, and I'd saved up money to take my girlfriend and myself to see the Pointer Sisters. And the Pointer Sisters back then used to do all this old retro stuff when they were doing the Salt Peanuts. They were doing all the 40s retro music and the wear. And they came to Winnipeg, and they said, well, we got in late, we're on our bus, and we're on our way to Vegas. We're just going to treat this like a undress rehearsal. And they came on stage in polyester slacks and
That's wrong.
Yeah, and you know what? And I never cared about the Pointer Sisters after that. I didn't care when they were doing the Neutron dance. I didn't care when they were so excited. I didn't care about doing the soundtrack for all of Eddie Murphy's movies. When I slapped down my money on the counter, they weren't there. Imagine going to see Elton John, and it's a sweatshirt and cutoffs. There's no sunglasses, there's no feathers, there's no platforms. I mean,
No toupee.
No toupee. I mean, the only ones that would be different for would be with a Guess Who, and even Burton Cummings. Randy Bachman, you couldn't expect much from back then. Now he gets kind of sharp with a native fringe kind of thing. Burton Cummings was like wearing white suits before Travolta was and what have you. But then somewhere around the show, he slipped into a hockey jersey, and then being a Winnipeg band, that was kind of acceptable. But I mean, imagine going to see Elvis, and I mean, you can draw the. So it's. I almost feel like as if I'm disappointing anybody that's ever seen me before if I don't show up on stage in a suit and tie.
I see. So now you're trapped.
I'm trapped in it, and I get younger female comics telling me I need to lose the pimp daddy look in order to get a better audience and a wider audience.
Oh. Okay.
So.
But suits aren't only for black comics.
No. In fact, I'm glad to see that that's coming back. Guys like Tom Papa are wearing them again. Greg Proops, but Proops is a throwback to that San Francisco 60-ish hipster, yeah, which goes to the Lenny Bruce, Dick Gregory, Hungry Eye, Purple Onion school of thought. Anyway, so. No, but for the most part, it just seems that there's a black guy wearing a suit, automatically it's a pimp. It's like if I wear a black fedora, everybody says you look like a pimp. Meanwhile, there's parts of Toronto where they have Orthodox Jews, and if you look, they all have the same hats, and no one's yelling that they are exploiting women or members of any underworld type of activity.
You can't win. You're either a pimp or a hood.
Yeah, except unless you're an Orthodox Jew, and then you're not wearing bling, you're selling bling, but only until sundown on Friday night.
Now, you've been at this game a long time. You started 83, or was it even before that?
First time I did stand-up, 1977, April 6, 1977. Oh. So I just had my 30th anniversary.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. It was, they threw me a nice party at Spirits, which is perhaps the premier open mic club in Toronto, and there's a lot of comics there, and a lot of love. It was kind of a roast, and it was good.
Now, you started in Winnipeg. Was it when you moved to Toronto, was 83? What's the 83 significance?
I moved in 83. I can't remember anything significant about 83. I think the Cubs almost won a playoff then. I moved to Toronto in 81. I started in 77. I would bounce back and forth between Chicago and Winnipeg back then. Chicago was a very tough place to get a day job while you're paying for your acting classes and trying to do open mics and what have you. So I'd shoot back to Winnipeg, work for 6 or 8 months, sock up the money. Then I made the move to Toronto, and then Toronto was home for the most part ever since then, except for I spent about a year and a half in San Francisco trying to make something happen.
Do you have American citizenship?
Dual. My father's born in New York, and I kind of
sweet.
grew up in Chicago, so I have the dual citizenship thing happening.
Well, then one has to ask, why Canada? Why
Healthcare. Healthcare, and it's like when I moved to San Francisco. Shortly before I moved, I met a girl, and we wound up getting married with like in record time. And we moved there, and then shortly after moving there, became pregnant, and my first daughter was born. Then my wife and I split up. So I didn't want to be one of these guys living in L.A. not knowing when I was going to see my daughter. And I also knew that if I was in Canada, I'd be able to make that child support easier and quicker than, doing whatever I was. I was taking a nosebleeding stateside, to be quite honest. So, for the sake of being closer to my daughter, was my reason for moving back to Canada. But everybody thinks that just because you get in the States, the door's open. That's not true. I mean, there's if you go on some of the websites where they have work for comics, like Road Comic, what have you. There's a lot of $150 gigs in Arkansas and in Mississippi and down in somewhere in Florida that, you have no idea of playing. So unless you've got the right management, being stateside means nothing, because all it just means is you're standing in line with everybody else who's already stateside.
So no regrets?
Oh, a few. But, like a friend of my mom said, no sense in when warehousing them. So I think the only regret I would have when it comes to my career, well, two, I wish I had kept working on the impressions, because you can always do good with that. Nobody ever boos or gets offended by an impressionist.
Who did you do?
I used to do Bogart and Edward G. Robinson and Cagney and Peter Lorre. Basically all the guys that were already dead 25 years at that point. So good thing I drifted from there. The only regret is for years everybody was telling me that I was too blue to ever go to L.A. And, L.A. would frown upon this and yada, 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 yada. And somewhere around that pistol whipping, Sam Kinison and Dice Clay were able to sneak in, kick open the door. And then they quickly they closed the door again, didn't they? But no, then Def Jam came through, and that opened a whole different market where political correctness was not even an issue. And the comics could say whatever they wanted to, which was I found refreshing, especially when in the other mainstream clubs it was becoming very restrictive at that time. And then now you've got Chappelle and you've got Hicks. I mean, first time I saw the Chappelle show, when I saw him do that R. Kelly bit where he was peeing on the girl, I thought, this man does not believe in God. And he does. He believes in Allah. But at the time he says there's no decent. How could they let him do this on TV in America? So it's hard to say. But just from everybody telling me what everybody else's opinion was. You're too hardcore for LA, and my mistake. The only mistake I think I've ever really made was listening to anybody on that one.
Your style, you were what? The Sultan of.
Oh, I was Raging Bull.
What was it called?
The Raging Bull, Sultan of Smut. Sultan of Smut.
Yeah.
I was called the Black. I was called Canada's Pryor, the Black Kinnison. The Canadian Black Dice. They always gave me all kinds of other nicknames to put it through there. But I think the Raging Bull, which was a club owner Donnie Coy gave me, which is the one I probably stuck to the most. Raging Bull of comedy, because to me, he said I went on stage and I just threw shots and I didn't let up and I just kept pounding. To me, that was the one that I think I liked the most.
Have you gone away from the blue material? I know you've gone more political lately.
I have with some like of my comics. My comics I shot in 1994. It was basically all political, and then the comedy now that just aired a week or so ago, I'd say is probably about 75% political, 25% as blue as I could get away with on CTV.
And your new CD is called Blue.
Well, yeah, it's blue. It's there's political material in there, and the suit's blue, and the language. The language I think is more of it than the subject matter.
Yeah.
Because I watch comics now, and it seems like everybody's working blue. Seems like there are comics that are just corporate, but even the guys who were considered clean a couple of years ago now have what's known as dick jokes in their act.
Well, to get on TV now, there's more than just the 3 networks, right? So you can pretty much say what you want.
Well, in Canada, so much. Stateside, well, there's HBO and there's Showtime. Excuse me, there is just too much coffee going on this room.
We're both sick.
On the way, it's coming down. But still, to get that Letterman, to get that Leno, to get that Conan, you still have to be pretty clean. Still, and still middle of the. Well, we'll say middle of the road. Yeah, because as much as they say they like edgy, they don't like edgy. They don't like anything that's going to offend anybody. They don't like anything that's going to cause anybody not to buy the products that are being advertised. They don't like anything that's going to cause the sponsor to say, we don't know if we can continue putting money into your show. HBO and Showtime, they're different, I guess. But before you get one of those things, you got to be living there, and they like to know that you'll justify them putting you on TV for a half hour or an hour where their markets of people to see, that you've been known around their circuit, sort of.
Now, when you started out, that was before the boom, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, so what got you into comedy?
Wanted to be an actor, and I was taking drama at University of Winnipeg and what have you. And all the auditions, none of the auditions I ever went for with anything were ever for actors of color. So they're doing a play on the what was it, 1909 general strike in Winnipeg. Everybody had a Ukrainian or a Russian or a Polish name. So needless to say, when I walked in with my Billy Preston size afro back there in 1977, next, so it was total rejection. It was there not being a place in the casting world for me. And around the same time, I discovered Richard Pryor's album That Nigger's Crazy. And I'd already, I had done impressions before that, and some guy tried to talk me into doing them in a bar that he owned as an entertainer. And the whole idea of being a stand-up comic, was like, what? That's for dinks and old guys. And then I heard Pryor, and that completely rewrote the description and the definition of what a comic could be and should be for me. So I guess that would be the reason why I jumped into it. So it was a frustration not being able to get the opportunities to work as an actor. And with stand-up, it seemed like all you had to do is convince some bar owner to let you have his microphone in his indifferent audience for a couple of weeks at a time.
How were you starting out?
My first time up, I guess I did well. They responded to the impressions, and then the second week out, I bombed. And then that was enough to make me come back the third time, saying, "Okay, we're not going to bomb again." And so I was addicted by it. But for the longest time, I guess from the beginning, I was always raw. I was always kind of raw, always a little bit blue. And that's because my introduction to wanting to be a stand-up comic. I mean, I've seen them before. I mean, I grew up watching Mike Douglas and Jack Parr, and and I knew all about Dick Gregory, and at that time you'd see Jay Leno on Don Kirshner's rock concert. And you go, oh, there's that guy again, But for me, Pryor was like the one and only. So of course, if that's your major influence, then you have no idea why everybody's upset over the fact that you've just used the word motherfucker. Yeah. You just finished listening to 4 hours of it while you've played every album that the guys put out, and then the Red Fox and what have you. So I was blue from day one. They were different club owners were trying to squish that out of me.
But you were unsquishable. Was there?
And I had some great encouragement. Ernie Butler, dear friend of mine, just passed away, owner of the Comedy Nest in Montreal. Wayne Fleming and myself did a terrible movie filmed in Montreal called Rebel High. And we were there for about 3 or 4 months. And at the time, Kinnison was just popping big. And at the same time, all the club owners and bookers that I had been working with, they say, look, we're getting walkouts, we're getting complaints. And I was getting copies of the complaint letters. And some of them I kept, and some of them I crumpled up and threw, or I burned, or I did some kind of ceremonial destruction thing while we were partying. I wish I kept them all now because they're all giggles. But I was playing Ernie's room every night. And right before I go on, Ernie would say to me, shake 'em up. Because he used to love to sit back and watch his audience react and respond to whatever I was doing. So at that point, when all the other bookers and club owners were trying to tell me, tone it down, Ernie'd say, shake 'em up. Well, that's like saying to Tiger Williams, sending him over the boards and saying, "Can you hurt somebody?" Of course it's going to happen. There's a goon, and you're encouraging him. You're giving him the thumbs up to go draw blood. So that was probably the one place where we weren't really discouraged. That and Mark Bresson has always had a love for the profane.
Yeah.
Been supportive that way, even though his partners and people he had to work with were kind of going, Mark, can you kind of tone this down? Absolutely not. So
30 years in the business, was there ever a time when you thought, I got to quit?
Every day.
Every
day. There's a line from a Bukowski poetry reading that I have on tape, and he goes, I'd go back to the factories if they'd have me. And I think he said I'd go back to the post office. It was me that said I'd go back to the factories if they'd have me. And there's been many times, there's times when I'm not working and you're going, geez, I wish I hadn't quit university. And then there's times when the audience really aren't appreciating what you're doing very much, and that's why I say, gee, I wish I'd still done impressions, because like I said earlier, nobody ever boos or walks out on an impressionist. So it hasn't been smooth sailing, not by any means. It's like people, for years they've saying, gee, it's great that you've, you're Kenny Robinson, you can get away with saying that. Well, not always, and not even, I don't even know if I'll get away with saying something tonight.
Interesting. Tonight at the club, we're talking. You're at Yuck Yucks here this week when we're
anywhere tonight may be. I don't know. Okay. When I go home to my wife, I don't know if I can get away with saying certain things. So there's no guarantees.
But you don't hold back.
Excuse me. I think age has maybe slowed me down a little bit with letting it fling. You stop and you think, okay, do I really believe what I'm about to say? Now that eliminates a whole lot of garbage coming out of your mouth. If you're going to be accountable for something that you say.
You don't want to say it just for shock value.
No. Or if you are going to do it for shock value, know that there's going to be repercussions and then get ready to play with the repercussions of it. But no, I basically, I've never really just been for shock value, even though, to the people that weren't familiar with me that said, oh, you're just saying it to be shocking. Well, no, I said that because that's how I fucking feel right now. And, so you have to make sure that you're going to stand by what you say, and it's got to be funny, and hopefully it's got some stage legs to it. Like I'm a news junkie, so there's I'd rather talk about what's going on with the monks in Burma. Not that I've got anything written about it yet, because those are probably things you'll probably kick open better in an open mic type thing where you play with and it comes together, as opposed to but most audiences don't want to hear that. I can never recall there being a big lineup of people going, we want more political, we want more social commentary. So I think most people want to hear something that they can't hear at home, either on TV or in their general life. So the idea of letting it fly, it still has its appeal. But I guess I'm more careful about what my topics are, what I'm going to select with, what I'm going to play with.
We're talking with Kenny Robinson, and the show is What's So Funny on CFRO 102.7 FM. I'm Guy McPherson, up here in the suite of
semi-suite
semi-suite of Kenny Robinson. Now, you, as we mentioned, have been around 30 years doing comedy. A lot of well-known comics have come out of Toronto. And just off the top of my head, you think of Jim Carrey and Howie Mandel, and you've seen these guys come and go.
Yeah, well, Mandel was already gone by the time I hit Toronto. When I first came to Toronto, when I first met Jim Carrey, I remember saying to the guys that he was living in one apartment upstairs from where the comics I knew were living downstairs. And they always say, what do you think of Carey? What do you think of Carey? And I said, great faces, but he needs to work on the voices more. And I think his response was, who's this fucking guy? Who is this guy? I was in town maybe 2 days. But coming from a background of being an impressionist, I know that if I hear like somebody do an impression that's not a very good one, I get goosebumps. If it's a bad impression, like if there's a hack doing a Nicholson and it's a bad Nicholson and it's bad material, I get golf balls on my arm. So sometimes I almost feel like I would gag. So I don't think I was being very critical. I was going, the faces are great, just a little bit more with the voice, a little bit more. Then meanwhile he had 1,000 different. I had 8 or 10 that I thought I was okay with, and he had like thousands he could pull out of a bag and throw. So
did you foresee the fame that he would reach?
I love that question. Years ago, somebody interviewed me, and they asked me, they're trying to do a documentary on Carey, and they said, did you know Jim was going to be that big when you first seen him? And I laughed. I said, fuck, I thought I was going to be big when I first seen him. Jimmy, I wasn't thinking about Jimmy. I was thinking about me then. But when I first came to town to Toronto, he had all the hype, and there were people lined up to see him. And, every time you're on the subway and you'd hear some girls that, were saying, oh, we were at a comedy club the other day and Jim Carrey was so funny. And then you'd read, another article in a newspaper. And then somebody else somewhere else would say, do you know Jim Carrey? So the buzz was on him. And he was only maybe still staying in Toronto maybe 6 to 8 months by the time I moved here. Then he made his move to L.A. after that. So I saw a bit of him, but, he was basically bags packed and heading out of town by the time I hit.
Oh, really? Yeah, the example I give in my own life is playing basketball with Steve Nash when he was a high school player.
Okay.
And I was older. No one would even ask.
Second string.
Well, no, he was good. Mm-hmm. He was very good. But would you go, he's going to be the MVP of the NBA? No, you don't think that.
You thought he'd be that, was it called the fifth man award they give him? He'll be that one white guy that every team has.
Exactly. Well, there was a writer in town here, a Vancouver Sun writer, who said that he'll play 2 years in the NBA and then be in the CBA.
Wow.
Well, he was wrong.
That guy probably doesn't get too many interviews, does he? But since Carey, I guess I've seen them all come and go. Then Brent Butt's first road trip was with me in Saskatchewan, and he didn't know that he was going to need bus fare to go from town to town, so I had to front him that. Norm Macdonald, first time or second time he came to Toronto, crashed on my couch. Harlan Williams, first paying gig was me. I gave him $75 to do a gig called Fitzgerald's that I was booking up in Newmarket, Ontario. Yeah, when you've been around as long as I have, you see them all, kind of thing. There's a big list of guys that thought were going to be big that didn't pop.
Sure, and I guess a lot of guys that start out and maybe have a bit of talent and then just drop out for whatever reason.
Oh yeah, and then there's even more guys that had no talent, and the ones I like are the ones that had no talent, and then you read about them being arrested for some kind of criminal activity. You kind of we draw quite a few sociopaths as well along the way. So there's that's a great thing. Sometimes we get together with comics like Harry Dupe is a comic that
Former Vancouver.
Yeah, former Vancouver guy, and when we were we were both living in San Francisco at the same time. So we start trying to remember names of people that did that worked this club or that circuit, and you can remember parts of their act, and you can't remember their names anymore. And then, like he was saying the other night, we were talking about when Margaret Cho was just starting out in San Francisco, and I finished ahead of her in a comedy competition, and she was saying that she was ripped off, and I was just hoping that we got some of the cash money that night, because on the way back from, I think it was in Chico, California, I had to stop off and get some formula and some Pampers, and I was kind of low on money. So I was gigging for Pamper money. I was gigging for formula. My daughter doesn't know that. Now she wants to go to university in San Diego and leave her poor dad here in Canada after I did the reverse thing. But, I was riffing for Pampers. No, when you look at me and hear my act, you don't think that this guy was ever riffing for Pampers, but, that's how I feed the babies, so.
Interesting. I mean, you have 3 kids, and older now, or what? The youngest is
the oldest is 17. The youngest just turned 7, and the middle girl just turned 8. So
now you've you talk about your act being blue and all this. Do they hear it? The younger ones?
The younger ones, I try to chase them out of the room. But I mean, I swear in front of them. I don't try to pretend these words don't exist. I'm even teaching them a few swear words along the way. If some kid says something to them at school, I try to give them a comeback with it or what have you. My poor oldest daughter, she always seems to get teased by somebody that's seen me do something on TV where I talk about her or something. So she's had to pay the price for being my daughter did this, my daughter did that. Then there's always her classmates making cracks about that. So she's the oldest one. She has to pay for the sins of the father, I guess, at that one.
Is she talented comedically?
Probably no. She's not really comedically inclined. Probably my son is the one that's got the most natural rhythm and sense of humor. He kills me sometimes the way I come up with something. So it's and sometimes it's so brutal and so vicious, and you go, where did that little prick get that from? Then my wife says, I wonder. So
exactly. Soon he'll be riffing for your Pampers.
I hope not. I hope that day doesn't. I don't want that for my son. Let him be a lawyer. For this, I don't. I don't want for my daughter, the middle daughter. She wants to sing, and she's had a few auditions and what have you. But I would not want showbiz for my children. My father was an entertainer, and I would try to discourage that for my kids.
Did he try to discourage it from you?
He died before I was before I was old enough to. But had he lived, would have been a whole different Kenny Robinson. I would have been Ben Vereen. It would have been Vegas, would have been Tuxedo, would have been song and dance, few jokes, a little tap dance here and there. Would have been more along that Ben Vereen, Sammy Davis, school of all-around cocktail entertainer type of thing.
You created a show, and you mentioned Richard Pryor as the guy that got you into it. You created a show that's still going, the Nubian Disciples of Pryor.
Yeah, we're the hottest show in Toronto for, it'll be 13 years in April. We started 13 years ago. There was only a few comics of color in the country working. Myself, Ronnie Edwards, Evan Carter, Greg Morton, Gene Clark, who was more of an actor than a comic, and found out that there were a lot of comics of color, Russell Peters and what have you, that were trying to they were coming up, and the doors were being closed to them for whatever reasons. So. I had already had some stature in the comedic community, and my attitude was, well, if I don't try and, open the door for some of these kids, who's gonna? And at the same time, Russell Simmons had just started Def Jam on HBO. So there was a time, the time was right. We had done we'd done 1 or 2 black comedy shows with all black comics and some hip-hop music at a couple of places, and the response from the audience was incredible, even though the turnout hadn't been that big, but it was the first time that community had a chance to hear its own voice. So Mark Breslin asked me if I would put together a show at Yucks, and I said no problem, and Our first show, we turned away about 100, 150 people. And 13 years later, we're still doing it, and there's so we developed basically a brand new market and a whole brand new talent pool.
Mm-hmm.
So and now it's for the longest time I tried to just go with just black comics, but within 2 years that I was always like Russell Peters was from the first show, so black and brown. But now we've got we've had Korean comics and Howie Miller out of Alberta. When he was in Toronto, he did the show. Filipinos, Ron Jossel. So basically, we're as multicultural as this country itself is. We've,
is that a reflection on Canada's cultural makeup
so.
that you can't maintain a show with just black comics?
Yeah, stateside. If I was living in Atlanta, I'm sure I could.
Yeah.
But being in Canada, no. But also, it also shows there's also a hip hop culture. It's a youth market and a hip hop culture. So you have a lot of white kids that are talking about Jay-Z, and sometimes, or there's Rob Clifford's a young white comic that he's young, he's 32. What a kid! But he's grown up in a predominantly black neighborhood of Toronto, so he's very eloquent when it comes time to the use of Jamaican patois. So when he starts throwing the patois out, the Jamaicans fire off their finger guns and they leap up, and it's standing ovation for the guy. So him having enough knowledge of the West Indian culture to be able to use their patois, that thrills them, and they relate to them as well. So I think it's multicultural, and it's also that hip hop influence that has crossed races as well.
Sure, it's not even. I mean, it's crossed races, as you say. So now I think it's more generational. Are you a fan of hip hop?
Some. Basically, when I'm drinking in my kitchen, I like to listen to Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash. And when I'm in my car on the way to a gig, I want to listen to Muddy Waters and Buddy Guy. But and then if somebody complains that they don't like the blues, I'll play Notorious B.I.G. to give them something to cry about. But no, I love Jay-Z. Ludacris. Ludacris is just silly. He's ludicrous. 50 Cent's first album I kind of liked, and since then, I guess you read the headlines and you see, gee, there's too many young men gunned down. So, all these songs about shooting somebody and killing somebody and having their crew murder your whole crew and kill your whole family. I'm going, well, maybe it's a bit much now. But I originally loved Niggers with Attitude and Two Live Crew because I've always had a love of the profane. When Johnny Cash, I never really didn't grow up listening to Johnny Cash, but when I first heard Boy Named Sue and he said "son of a bitch," I went, I swore! And for me, I had to go out and buy the 45 record, and then when I got to the son of a bitch part, it was bleeped. I wanted my money back, but the store doesn't give you a refund because the record you bought was censored. I'm like, but I wanted "son of a bitch" on my record. So then by the time when hip hop had come around with Luther Campbell, Luke Skywalker, hey, we want some pussy, and then all the other obscene language, I went, wow, this is great. These guys are swearing and singing. So ever since like being little, having a love of the profane, I just grabbed it and some of it, but it's a bit much. And I like to listen. I like to play some Kid Rock sometimes, and the wife has to make me turn it off. Now my son, he doesn't like to hear any music with swearing. He goes, turn it off. He swears too much. And then the 8-year-old daughter, she's starting to swear more in front of me. So I can't blame hip-hop for that. That's parents. Need to put a sticker on my forehead.
3 times now you've mentioned the N-word. Don't you know that you're not allowed to say that anymore?
Oh, I can. I can.
Somebody recently was just a black comic.
Andy Griffin. He was doing the thing is, he did it for a big black magazine where they had, some people may refer to them as bougie niggas. They were, and so and members of the NAACP were there and what have you. So when he went and said it, it was like, Paul Mooney said he wasn't going to say it, but then a couple weeks later he said it again. He went, shit, I still can't stop saying it.
What's your take?
I believe it's the context.
Yeah.
I've been stopped on the streets. A young woman walked up to me, and she's a university student. She goes, you've been an influence on many comics, and you're mentoring people, and you've brought so much joy to the community. Why do you say nigger? Why do you, why do you do this? And I looked at her, and because I've heard the speeches before, and I just smiled and said, because that's the kind of nigger I am. And then with that, her head exploded, and she didn't know what to say. But no, I've earned the right. There were bars in Winnipeg where I'd be drinking with friends, and bikers would come in and say, either leave now, nigger, or get your ass kicked. Well, wasn't nobody correcting them on the language they were using or protecting me from the violence that I faced. So if I use it, that's my freedom, that's my right, and that's my choice.
And as you mentioned, context is a little different.
Context.
A little different.
Context always. And it's still, what do we have? We had the Gina 6, new Motown act. We had the Gina 6, last week where they're back in Louisiana hanging ropes again. So are we gonna worry because is the N-word being used? Never mind that. And that kid that got beat up by the 6 students, he got his ass beat because he used the N-word, didn't use it in the right context. So there's real live racial problems happening. So that's why I won some money writing a couple of jokes for a newspaper when Kramer used the N-word. But I wasn't horrified because at the same, there's always something. There's always worse happening. The same time that happened, there was the guy that got shot by the cops on the night before his wedding, coming out of the strip club in New York. So, somebody wants to beat a drum about the N-word. Fine. I myself, I use it in my off-stage conversations. Sometimes I notice I can turn an audience off with it too. I can lose an all-black audience with it. Sometimes a white audience, they'll feel awkward. He just said it. It's okay to laugh. And other times a black audience will freeze and we go, no, we're not having that. And then other nights, there's not another word that fits better. There's not another word that fits better for it. Perfect example, a joke that I wrote. I was really impressed when Louis Farrakhan had the 6 million man march. You can get 6 million men to march for nothing. I can't find 5 niggers help me move. So I can't find 5 brothers help me move. Well, okay, it might work. I can't find 5 black guys help me move. I can't find 5 buddies help me move. So you see the level. I can't find 5 niggas help me move. The rhythm of it just fits so much better with that.
Yeah. And when you talk about Michael Richards, Kramer, I think the context there was not
completely different.
Humorous even.
It was humorous if you live in Louisiana and you hang ropes from trees. You niggas stop heckling me. He said what he meant. And I don't know if he was working so much on satire, but I was reading some other articles about him before then, and he had used some very strong anti-Semitic words when giving shit to a Jewish female comic. So he used some very sexist and misogynist language as well there. So I don't think. I think it's just Michael Richards just uses bad words all the time. I felt sorry for poor Imus when he lost the gig. I thought sure maybe a $1 million donation to the school should be fine and what have you. I don't know if he deserved to lose it. And then I was looking at stuff, and Imus been telling terrible racist jokes for years. But there's a comic I saw on Just for Laughs in Montreal. Ian Edwards, he said when he had no idea who the Rutgers girls were because he wasn't watching it. So when he looked at a picture of them on the internet to see what all the complaint was about, he looked at them and he says, and they are some nappy-headed hoes. So I grabbed my heart and I fell to my knee, and then I laughed. And later on I said, that was beautiful that you had A, the brains, and B, the balls, the brains to say, yes, I'm going to say it, and the balls to carry it off. And it was 6 months after the fact so there wasn't a big gasp of air leaving the lungs of people in the club. We got away with it and then moved on to the next bit. So once again, though, depends on the context and how it's used. I did a show with two female comics, Katie Davis and Shannon Laverty. No, Judy Kroon and Katie Davis, 2 white female comics. And they were on before me, so when I came on, I said, how about a big round of applause for these 2 funny nappy-headed hoes? Well, they had straight hair. So me calling them nappy-headed hoes, well, they weren't nappy-headed.
Ironic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you talk about black audiences, and I always get confused. In the States, it's African-American. Do you say African-Canadian?
No.
You say black?
No, I say black. Because, in fact, the predominant crowd that we draw comes from a West Indian or a Caribbean background. So if you want to, call them African Canadian, they may say, no, we're Caribbean Canadian.
Right.
So play it safe and just call them black. because otherwise, and if I do call them Caribbean, then you got to. What about the ones from Nova Scotia? Okay, sorry. Then of course we've got a few comics of African background. So then you may have somebody Nigerian in the audience going to feel left out. So I'm not trying to include everybody, and then you, and then you, and you. I'm not going to go do the Don Rickles, Russell Peters shtick of talking about everybody. I'm just lumping into one big color, black.
Now, other than the population-wise, is there a reason you think why there are so few black comics in Canada?
Population would be the number one, and also maybe because there's not the same kind of segregation that there is in the United States. I have friends. One day I was working as an extra in the movie Blues Brothers, and I was talking, the way guys talking. One guy said, I swear before I die, I'm going to get me a white girl. And I thought, what a silly thing to swear before you die. And then I thought, well, you know what? He may not know anybody white. He may not know, actually, he may know a white woman when he goes to get his license renewed. He may deal with one if he goes to a suburban mall. Excuse me. But where he works, where he socializes, where he went to school, there wouldn't be any. So he has to, of course, dream big then. He's looking outside of his box. He's dreaming outside of the hood, outside of his circles. The dance clubs he goes to on Friday and Saturday night, there won't be anybody white there. Because that's just the way how the United States is segregated that way. So I think, or they like to call it a melting pot, but it is segregated, separate but equal. So I think as a result that in Canada, the population and also there isn't that huge segregation like they have stateside. Is perhaps another reason for it. But at the same time, for years, comics of color were, in Canada, were performing to white audiences. So they always had to do that crossover thing. That's why when the Nubians came, we had a predominantly black audience. It was like FUBU, for us, by us, So it was the first time in this country where an audience could go and hear their own voices heard from that community. That's why comics like Jean Paul and Orson Payne and Mr. Moe and Mark Trinidad, they were doing a lot of West Indian material, a lot of patois-orientated material. So, of course, it had a bigger response because that was even going, it's, West Indian food, West Indian habits, the dialects that their grandmothers may speak before beating you with a belt on the way to church. All these things that was of their culture were things that they hadn't heard in the comedy clubs before because it was predominantly just white, comics doing that material.
Did you ever take this show on the road? It seems like ripe for the
It would
time.
be right if we ever had the right promoters. I gotta have somebody that they have a grassroots connection with the community. Somebody may say, well, there's no black people in Vancouver. How could you do a show? Meanwhile, I'm sure there are dances and parties. Maybe you only hear about it on Sunday after a shooting, but I'm sure there are dances and parties and clubs in this town where if you went there Saturday night, there may be 600 black people there. And it happens every Saturday night, but because it's out of the mainstream and it is segregated that way, but it's hitting apart. So, yeah, if I had the right producers and the right people that could make it happen, definitely would love to take it. And at the same time, have a place so that, maybe there's some black comics in Vancouver that aren't coming over the crossover thing and they'd love to try and step out. Out in Alberta, throughout Manitoba. I mean, I practically had to, throw a rope around Dana Alexander's neck when I first met her in Alberta and said, you got to come to Toronto. And she was very excited about doing the Nubian show. And the very first time she did a Nubian show, they booed her off.
Yeah, she told me. Yeah.
And she came back tough. And she just headlined the last show last Sunday and kicked the hell out of the room. Because she shoots from the hip and doesn't pull any punches. So it's still your comedic skills and your commitment is what's going to get you through. So, but she was thrilled to play for a black audience for the first time. And they said, "We'll teach you to be excited about us." But she came back and she tore them up.
And I saw Cedric the Entertainer here at a 1,000-seat theater, and I didn't know we had that many blacks in Vancouver. But I guess it came up from Seattle. Yeah.
Well, or they, like I said, they may have been here. Exactly. Yes, but Cedric is a type. I mean, he's got a crossover appeal. So I mean, Cedric is that could draw like that. A lot of other black comics couldn't. But like when Chris Rock played Toronto, there were very few black people there. So I guess he's more
he really crosses over.
Yeah, well. And the high ticket price at Massey Hall was also something, probably an issue. But
we are talking with Kenny Robinson on What's So Funny. I'm Guy McPherson, and the station CFRO 102.7 FM in Vancouver. Now you nurture and mentor a lot of young comics. At what stage in your career were you the guy that was looked up to? I mean, obviously, when you're starting out, you're not helping out young people.
I guess it started out right before I became a headliner, because back then it wasn't really nurturing. What it was is, hey, Wayne Termel just moved here from Vancouver. Yeah? Wayne, what music do you like? Yeah, we like Albert King. Okay, let's play some Albert King, and then you drink it at my place, then you pass out on my couch. And then the next day, we're pals. So it was just a love of other comics. I mean, that became my now that I have a second wife and family, now I don't, now I'm not nurturing grown men as often because now I have real children to father. But it came from, this is my crew, these are my gang, these are my people, this is my community, this is my circle of friends. So the easiest thing in the world was to somebody else that was funny or that made you laugh or had the same dream. Easiest thing in the world was to embrace them.
What kind of advice do you give young comics? You just let them find their own way?
Well, it depends. I mean, it depends on the comic. Overall, though, I'd say keep writing, stay smart, talk about something that matters to you. I find a lot of empty, rattle, 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 yaddle, yaddle, yaddle comedy that what does it matter? I guess maybe I am a throwback to the Lenny Bruce, Dick Gregory, prior, talk about what matters to you kind of thinking, Like one of the bits, I do a lot of stuff now, not as much as I'd love to do, but I do a lot of stuff about the war, so I'm covering that. I'm doing a lot of material about my fear of pedophiles, now that I'm a father and what have you. So those, I think, are probably the two biggest chunks that I look forward to getting to each night. And throughout the day, I'm always trying to see if I find something else new to add to it. Those are two things, probably the closest thing to me right now. So, I love to have comics read more. They went through a period of mindless comedy, and I'm not down with that. If a comic is blue and he's being discouraged, I'll say, well, be as blue as you want, but you also have to. But I'll tell you now, there's a lot of empty dates on my calendar because they say I'm too blue. And then I sit back and I hear everybody else just swearing and filthy as all hell, and I'm going, they changed the rules while I was napping, didn't they? But, so I'll tell them straight up. I says, more doors will open up for you if you're not considered a blue act. I had a showcase for a CBC radio thing that we're doing not too long ago, and I didn't warn any of the comics. I said, just let them go do their thing. But one comic I emailed a week earlier, and I gave her a whole big chat about, how the doors open better for you and faster for you, and more doors open if you're clean, and if you can do this and do that. Then there's another comic that is a Ugandan background, and I was tugging the producer's coattails on check him out. He's smart, clever, and clean. Kid never did an off-color joke in his life. That night, went up on stage. I had such a load of comb, I could gag a giraffe. I mean, everything was like I'm banging my head against the wall, and then he'd stop, and then the next thing was even dirtier than the thing he said before. And the audience is loving it. They're falling out of their seats, and I'm thinking the whole time, here I am up there tagging you as this new phenom for her to watch, and now you're going to kill her with this cleanness. So I was busting his balls the other night. So he said, just for that, I'll never do a dirty joke again. I said, no. Next time. I said, I'll let you know, keep the dirty stuff out because there's somebody I brought down to see you. And I says, but I just felt like a horse's ass because here I am going, you're going to love this kid. He's so clean. Yeah. And then filth, just spewing. So this woman's saying, well, maybe Kenny really doesn't know what clean is.
Yeah, clean compared to you.
So I want to grab this, I want to say, do you ever see Donnie Brasco? If I vouch for you, that means we're both a dead man if you do the right thing. So, be smart, keep writing, and, I love blue. I love edgy humor, but the sad truth is the marketplace is freezing it out. I dream of the day when everybody's able to go there. Nobody says, is it clean or is it dirty? Is it just funny? And but meanwhile, if, you want to have a lot of presents underneath the Christmas tree, there's certain rules you got to play because this is business.
Who mentored the young Kenny Robinson?
Let's see. When I first started out, there was two comics that really took me under their arms in Chicago. In Canada, nobody. But in Chicago was Jim Fay. He was the house MC at Zanies when they first opened. He also had a comedy troupe called Chicago Comedy Rangers. So when he left Zanies, Second City opened up a runoff theater where they used Jim Fay's troupe as the house group. So he was both a stand-up and an improviser. and sketch player. So he was one of the guys that took me under his wing, and he said, "Thing is, you're a real comedian. You're always looking for what's funny. You're always looking at what's irony. You study what you studied. You're more of an artist than a lot of the guys coming up." So he was very supportive. At the same time, he was saying, "And why do you have to be blue? Why do you always have to throw that other extra part in? And smile more." I was never a smiler, so everybody always thought I was angry, even though I wasn't. I just not one of these. So over the years, I learned how to put on that instamatic grin. And then the worst influence on me, I probably love him the most. Poor Jim Fay. He died of a heart attack way too young. There's a great article written in one of the Chicago papers how him and Robin Williams, they improvised with each other at Second City. Then they went to Zanies. Then they went around to another club. And the article ended that the four of them were staggering up Wells Street at 4 a.m. looking for another stage. So that was how Fay was. And Fay told me, learn to improvise. And if you got to steal a joke to get the gig, steal the joke. And meanwhile, guys, what? But the influence on me that was probably the one that led me astray was Orlando Reyes. He was a black comic out of Chicago. Excuse me. He had his hair conked like Barry White and drove a big green Delta 98. Always dressed to the nines. And just as blue as can be. The first year Showtime had a competition on TV. Steve Allen was the host, and Steve Allen looked as green as a dill pickle after Orlando finished doing his set. And he was dying on the showcase thing, and somebody in the audience yells, "Well, I think you're funny." And Orlando goes, don't nobody care what no nigger from the South Side thinks. And I'm this him dying on TV, and somebody's shouting support from him from the audience, and he reduces his man. He's like, "Don't nobody care what some nigger from the South Side think." And he says, "Well, I'm going to be gone now. I guess I'll just get in my car and go back and fuck my big fat white woman that's waiting for me after going with no money." So even though he was dying on this first time, Showtime had this comedy competition on pay TV when cable was new. He's dying, and the other guys, like Jerry Dye was the winner that night. He was hot for maybe 6 months in Vegas, what have you. This like before the boom. So back when the whole idea of cable was new, of pay TV was new. So here he was, just dying with his act, but still staying with it, and that was him. And he was, he gave me like my first gig for $35 somewhere, and he was a guy that, if he'd take you to a gig that started at 2 a.m, and there might have been strippers there when they were off duty, and if there was any kind of drug you'd never seen before, he was the one telling you how to do it, how much to do it, and where to do it, and all the other stuff like that. And Jim Fay would say, "Yeah, Orlando's funny, but you should spend more time watching Doc." That was the nickname that Arsenio Hall had back in Chicago. We called him Doc. Why, I never knew. But everybody knew him that used to call him Doc. And he says, "Arsenio's clean." And then we saw Arsenio wound up being huge, became an icon. For a minute, he was a challenger for Letterman and Leno. And he's faded away since, but he had the big breakout career and what have you. And hopefully Orlando is still introducing some acts somewhere at 2 o'clock in the morning somewhere. Sometimes he was the kind of guy that a club owner may not have had the money for him, so he gave him a car that maybe needed a new transmission. So he was a survivor. He got shot a couple of times. He moved into this one white neighborhood on the south side of Chicago in a suburban that had a burning cross put on his lawn. And the whole time, the whole time on stage, and just everybody, just a very loving man, very funny guy, and very smooth. So to me, Orlando was, he was, the good comics were saying, "Don't go with Orlando, he's going to lead you astray." But to me, Orlando represented everything that's going to be fun. I was 19 years old, no, I've never heard of this drug. How do you work? You put it under your tongue? Those girls take their clothes off for free now? It was great.
You've shared the stage with a lot of the greats, including Dave Chappelle. Did you get to know him much?
Not much. Chappelle was in town doing the movie Half Baked. So he came down, he did 2 shows. He was there for 2 months, so he came down on 2 different last Sundays of the month to do spots at the Nubian show. I think it was basically Russell Peters that dragged him down the first time. Plus the word, when the Nubians, we were hot every time. They were shooting a lot of films in Toronto. So as a result, every black celebrity came to the show on Sundays. One night was nuts. We had Isaiah Thomas before the sexual harassment lawsuit. So we had Isaiah Thomas in there, Will Smith, Jada Pinkett, Vivica Fox were just in the audience. And then Tommy Davidson came and did a spot. Then when the show's over, Jamie Foxx shows up at the door. Because everybody just left, So, excuse me, one time The rumor was that Denzel Washington was coming. Denzel didn't come, but his manager did. So the guy that was manager of the club said, well, you don't have Denzel with you, so don't come back without him. So we had to, send all kinds of apology phone calls and what have you, and never did hear from Denzel's people again. Another time, somebody from the production company said that James Earl Jones wanted to come down with a group of 12 people. So we had a whole section for James Earl Jones, and there wasn't a nigga named James Earl or Jones that night, but a bunch of other people coming in saying they were with them. So after a while, we learned that we just can't let these people drop these names and try to weasel their way in. We used to get all the Raptors. They used to come back when
they weren't European.
Back when Vince actually played and didn't cry and didn't get injured, and because the Raptors' first season in the NBA was our first year doing comedy, so that's probably the first time when I actually learned that I had to hold a punch. Because the night before the first game of the season, I can't remember the player's name. There's a Raptor that beat up his pregnant girlfriend, and I'm trying to remember, but he also got arrested for some other wife beatings and women beatings down in Texas. He was just a badass.
Alvin Roberts.
Yes, Alvin Robertson. So anyway, the Raptors had a media ban put on it, and they had it so he wouldn't have to go to trial till the season was over. Just don't you love the way how when money can make something happen?
Yeah.
They hushed it, and that's the night before their season opening game, their premiere in the NBA. So Alvin went out and he scored 35 points that night. So I think it was John Daly was that his name? Daly was the coach. Black hair used to coach the Pistons.
I don't think he was ever the coach of the Raptors.
The Raptors' first coach had a coach who had been with the Pistons, dark-haired guy.
Brendan Malone.
I'm not sure. I think the last name was Daly. But anyway, he came out and he said tonight Alvin Robertson was the man. So the punchline I had was, yeah, that's what he was trying to explain when he was beating the shit out of that pregnant woman in the hotel the night before. And the joke was there, and yet there was so much. There's even Raptors in the crowd that night. There was so much excitement between the NBA coming and our show that I just Smalley was in the audience, So I just felt like I just couldn't throw that shot because there were too much positive feelings with everything happening with it. Right. I mean, when the Raptors came to Toronto, that was a whole different market. All kinds of guys went and become promoters and made money just being gophers for these black NBA players that say, what the hell do I do in Canada? Well, we'll throw together a dance this Saturday. John Sally, that's what it was. Sally was going to was coming down the comedy clubs, and he was going to do stand-up at our shows. And then he had a big New Year's Eve party where coats got stolen and a car wound up in the lake behind the thing, and then Isaiah had to trade him because he drew too much bad heat to the Raptors name at that one. Gee, imagine how time changes, huh?
Yeah.
And now he cost his company $13 million.
Yeah, I have maybe 2 minutes left. I just wanted to get your take on the ironic racial humor that is prevalent now. You see it with Sarah Silverman, Lisa Lampanelli, and I assume it's ironic. But is there a negative? Do you take away from that?
Okay. I love Lisa Lampanelli, not so crazy on Sarah Silverman. So, Lisa, though, reminds me just of some rude-ass shit that I heard many times in many rundown joints along the way over 30 years of being in comedy. It could be some stuff you said in a green room in Cicero, Illinois, or it could be somebody that, was a girl I was drinking with after doing a gig in Saskatoon. So I like what she does. She makes me laugh. I think she's very bold. I can see where other people are very much offended by her. The first time I seen her, she didn't look as pretty as she does now. She should be really heavier in front of me.
Lisa Lampanelli looks
now
pretty.
She's gorgeous now. She's since she's got management, become hot. First time Breslin brought her to Toronto, woo, it was kind of scary, and you got to think, man, there's some things even brothers won't put the dick in, But she's a killer, and she's very funny. But I mean, that's just recycled Dawn Rickles, with or if you want to have Joan Rivers on crack.
Yeah.
I mean, more aggressive than Rickles.
Yeah.
Rickles, wouldn't say, Rickles never used the N word.
That's right.
He says, you colored guys, you black guys, I don't know. I do that. But, he goes, oh, yeah, these niggas was raping me the other night, then I paid them, whatever she does, Sarah, I think it's just maybe it's hers and not my cup of tea, but I'm not really offended by too much that she says or does. I used to care when politicians said shit or did shit, a comic, trying to find a riff on stage.
Oh. So that's really the question, if you're offended at all by any of these she's just not your cup of tea, as you were
Yeah.
saying, but you're not offended.
No, I mean, she's even in trouble now for when the reference she made about Britney's kids being unwanted. But that was taken off the cover of one of those things you stand at looking at while you're buying your groceries. She told both, apparently Britney told both kids that they were unwanted, or unplanned or whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, she's catching a lot of flack for that now. So, I mean, she's going to get lumped up. Years ago, it was like, I don't know if she'll ever get the backlash that Dice or poor Sam had to suffer. Listen, poor Sam, the comedy of hate. But, because they the media and all the different groups, they piled it on for those two boys real heavy. So I don't think she'll ever face that because A, she's a woman, B, she's Jewish. So she'll still, no matter how outrageous of some shit she says, she'll still manage to hide behind that. And because she's not intimidating, she's tiny and she's pretty and she's connected with the right people. So, I mean, I'm sure maybe someday she may say something that Reverend Sharpton may be offended by. But hopefully, he doesn't worry about that. He's spending more time removing the nooses from trees.
Well, she did get in trouble with the Asian watchdog group a few years ago. So
yeah, for when she said chink on Letterman?
Conan, yeah.
Yeah, Coleman. But meanwhile, Rosie O'Donnell will say any old kind of shit, but, somehow she didn't get in trouble when she did the oil thing on The View. But I think that's maybe they're just letting Rosie have all the rope to hang herself on that one, because then... And what about and we got baby killers in Vietnam? She used to say every time she opened her mouth, she was making more enemies. But, I mean, I really wasn't even offended by I don't really, I'm going to be the last person that's going to try and be offended by what somebody else is saying. I may get mad that they got the gig. I may get mad that I didn't think of the joke. But very seldomly if someone says something, I'm going to really want to take them to task.
Kenny Robinson, we could talk for another hour, but our time is up. Thank you so much for...
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure. I hope I didn't bore you.
Not at all.
I know sometimes my eyes go in the back of my head and I just start talking about something and then I come back and I go, what did I just say?
We got through this, both being sick.
Very sick. So. And now I have to hope that I just don't send Flim into the front row of the crowd tomorrow night.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Kenny Robinson. Hope you enjoyed that interview. Next week, Toronto Comedy Month continues, as Darren Frost will be a live guest in studio. Looking forward to that, even though I won't be here. We'll have a guest host. Sorry, Darren, if you're listening, news to you. But Darren will be here next week. The following Sunday, we have that Canadian guy, Glenn Foster, and the last Sunday in November, we have a couple Vancouver guys. Okay, it's not all Toronto comedy this month. Just seems like it. Trevor Duval and Dylan Reimer. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.